Hey movie breakers, this is Lida with another interview to Our River, Our Sky. And I'm here with one of the actresses, Meriam Abbas. Hi Meriam.
Hello.
And the director from Britain hails Maysoon Pachachi. Hi Maysoon.
Hello.
And my first question is, you both returned to your native Iraq at some point to make this movie. First, Maysoon, how was this experience for you? Because you've been living for decades in the UK, as I take it.
Yes, I mean, I went back to Iraq for the first time in 35 years in 2004. And I made a film there, which was me and a camera, a documentary film. I was out on the streets talking to people and in hospitals and in schools and so forth. So that was me reacquainting myself with a country I hadn't seen for 35 years and which I've hardly lived in, actually. I mean, if I add up all the years that I've been in Iraq, it comes to about 4, mostly when I was very young. So that was a very important trip for me. And at the same time, we started a colleague of mine who is an Iraqi filmmaker who's also based in London, a documentary maker. He and I set up a film training center free of charge for young people in Baghdad in 2004, in December. And so those students made a series of small documentary films about what was actually going on, mostly in Baghdad. And so I was collecting stories all the time from that. Also, I was their stories, and the difficulties they had in making their films and what they wanted to make films about and what had happened in their lives, because I hadn't been there for many years. So people were very keen to tell their stories. And the other thing was that in London, I was part of a group called Act Together, Women's Action for Iraq. And it was a women's group, and it was Iraqi origin and British people who had no connection with Iraq, but were concerned about this war that had happened and the destruction of the country that was going on. And so I was very much put in touch with women's groups in Iraq, and stories came flowing from there as well. So my feeling was, when I went back, is a sort of homecoming, although the vast majority of my life was lived outside of that country. But my roots are very deep there. And I was also reacting to in the 91 Gulf War. That was quite a traumatic time for me. I was in London, and like all the other Iraqis in London, I was watching TV 24 hours a day. And you saw smart bombs, blowing apart bridges or buildings, but you never saw one ordinary Iraqi person talking about what was going on there. And it was like the country and everybody in it was getting erased off the face of the world, of the map. And for me, this was a big shock. I mean, I went into a kind of shock to the extent that I forgot my name. I forgot how old I was. And I started to forget the most simple kinds of words in English, which I've spoken all my life, like window and table and salt, like that. So out of that came a film that I made, which was a kind of trying to put together something that had been shattered in real life, making in the face of unmaking, in a way, which was a series of interviews with Iraqi women who were living in exile at that time in London, and came from a variety of different religions and classes and political affiliations and so forth. And it was a series of interviews with them, and it was as if people had wanted to talk about things for 30 years, but it hadn't been possible. And so it was like the floodgates opened, and we recorded lots and lots of stories. And also I was collecting archive footage from the early 20s to that date, which was 94, when I was shooting the film. So that was the engagement with Iraq, and from then on I became actually very engaged with it.
Meriam, how was it for you? Because you have been living a longer time in Iraq until you were like a school child, and you've gone to school there.
Yes, I came here in the age of 12. And shooting with Maysoon in Iraq was, let me yes, it was 37 years after me coming to Germany. And honestly, I was, because you said, Maysoon, your roots were very strong in the past. And I would even say, in my case, maybe even didn't know that my roots were so deep, or I didn't want to see them before. So I was like, there are several reasons why I didn't go back before, but it was a really very emotional and strong experience for me to go back with this project. Although I wasn't in Baghdad, but was in Suleimania. You know, many memories of my childhood, of course, especially small things like, I don't know, sometimes like smells, like how the people laugh, how they make jokes. Although we were in the Kurdish area, but of course they speak in Suleimani also Arabic, not just Kurdish. I don't know. I just remember this time as a very intensive time, and of course, because of two reasons. One reason is this, what I'm talking about, these memories of my childhood, and the other reason is how close, how real the script got. What Maysoon wrote, I saw it and I lived it there by talking with the people who were living there, who were, I mean, everybody has a special experience there, where actors coming, of course Iraqi actors living in Europe, living in other countries, but also actors living in Baghdad and coming, but also in Kurdistan and Suleimania, and everybody whom I talked with, had in a way experiences in what we were showing in this film.
Maysoon, this is your first feature film, made many documentaries, and even though this one feels still very observational and it's strongly based in reality, it's a fictional story. It's not really real people we are watching. What made you decide to use that kind of form of film instead of your usually documented features?
I think there's in fiction, a fiction film gives you the opportunity to have a greater deal of intimacy with the characters than it would do in an observational documentary film. You can get beneath the surface, I feel, more easily if you're telling a fictional story sometimes. And I wanted to do that because I was really concentrating on these individual characters. I mean, that story, as you know, is a collective story. I mean, all these stories kind of intersect over a period of time. So that was really the main driver of it. I'd made quite a few documentary films, but I wanted to go deeper into what was happening to people.
And the main character, or the character that we have the strongest focus on, is a writer who has writer's block, and then just has to rediscover how she can maybe reprocess her culture by transforming it into something artistic. Is this something that comes from your own experience? Like, did you experience writer's block as intensely as this character, or thought about reprocessing your country or taking it back through forms of art?
Well, I mean, the first film that I talked to you about, the documentary film, it was that kind of a thing, because it was a kind of trauma. And the business of the writer's block, really, this was my co-writer, who is called Irada Juburi, and she is a novelist and short story writer. And at this time, she said to me, "I can't write one word of fiction. It's all like a lie. I can't." So she went around. She was going, taking her child to school, going to teach at the university, just normal life, going to the shops, whatever. She saw, small scenes being enacted when somebody was buying the groceries, and she would hear a bit of dialogue or something. She just wrote everything down verbatim, just as she saw it, heard it. And I, from my part, before we even started working on the script, I was doing the same sort of thing, with the students that I was teaching in Baghdad, and on the times when we brought them out of Baghdad to be safe, to cut their films and so forth. Just the stories that we had. It's from that material, really, that we extracted our characters. And I think I learned that lesson of creativity being a resistance to damage. And I think that's what I felt when I was finally able to make this small documentary that I first made with all the interviews and so forth. That's what that was. There was what I was seeing around me was just shattering. And this was something that was trying to bring together, and it was a kind of resistance, and I saw it a lot in Iraq. And sometimes a lot of the times it is making something. It is making something out of the rubble. And all the shards and splinters of the society around you. And so I think it's a very important thing. I think the resistance is what gets you out of bed in the morning to do what you need to do in a situation like that, which really you don't know whether you get home alive that night or not, for example.
How did you two get to know each other, and how did it happen that you, Meriam, got the role in the movie?
Well, I was the auditioning. The auditioning was sort of fairly spread. Although I was auditioning people in Iraq, I was auditioning people who were of Iraqi origin and but lived in Europe, for example, in various places and so forth. And I came to Berlin because I knew about Meriam, because I saw an early film that she was in.
It was the first film I shot it with the Iraqi director, Rashid, years ago, before we met.
Yeah.
Yes, and I even didn't know that. Where did you see it? In Iraq?
No, I saw it.
Maybe at a festival.
Rotterdam Film Festival.
Yeah.
I was on the jury.
Yeah. Oh,
I
nice.
gave it a prize.
Yes.
Yes,
And I think there aren't so many also Iraqi mother tongue or father tongue speaking actors. That's why I had this connection, or they connected me, because it was just a small character, which is what it was also lovely work. Yeah. So
I came here to. I had a couple of contacts. One of them was Ali Karim, who's the guy who was the boatman. He was living here in Berlin at the time, and Meriam. And so I did sort of auditions with both of them, and I came away thinking, yeah, these are the people. And so that was, and Dijla, the character that Meriam plays, is a kind of wild card. She's always getting herself into messes, and she comes and she dumps all her sort of problems on her friends, in her friend's lap. They were at university together, for example. That's the sort of backstory, and have always been close friends and have known each other's families and all the rest of it. And there was a sort of a kind of humor in Meriam, and a kind of stroppiness, that word means sort of like in your face type of thing that I really liked. We did some improvisations.
Although she's depressive.
She's depressive. She's up and down all the time. Yeah. Which you're not. But it's sort of it was something about it. It's an instinctive thing, intuitive thing. You just think she can do this.
But Meriam, at first, as I heard, you were a bit skeptical about playing that role, or hesitant. Is that correct?
No, not skeptical or hesitant. What I said is it was new for me to read such a script. First of all, of course, I'm acting a lot or get asked for acting Arabic woman, but these are more the stereotypes here in Germany, to act a mother which her son is criminal and all this stuff. So it was really one of the first script I liked. That first of all, not to be a mother, maybe, and no, but it was also for me to read such a script. It was difficult to imagine how the film will be then. So one side I was feeling I could feel the deepness of the character and the situation. I could understand. And on the other hand, I had difficulties to imagine because I was grown up in Germany, and honestly, I didn't know so much about this time Maysoon is talking about in the film, because I also just were dependent on the information I got here in Germany or in Berlin. What was new, and yes, and it was not the classic main character and the other small character, but I was not hesitating. I wanted to go into this travel work, but it was new for me. Yes.
The movie plays 2006. The U.S. Occupation has just kind of gone. The war is over, but it's still all very present and going on. The war is never really over for the people who have suffered under it. And then, of course, when the movie was shot, there were the events in Afghanistan, which is also then an U.S. occupied country, and everything there has just been disastrous. But also the Afghans were promised peace, everything would be fine, and of course the opposite has happened, as so often in history when the US were messing around. Who wonders why it was again like that? But was that something that influenced you, that you saw, okay, it's still in the Arabic world happening again and again and again? The current events had an influence on the script or the movie?
Well, I mean, the current events, yes, did, but not current events in Afghanistan. I mean, it was part of the same thing, but it had its particularities. I mean, each place that this happened to, but this kind of thing of going into a country and with a wrecking ball, like they knocked buildings down, was what it felt like in both places, I think. But I wasn't in Afghanistan, I didn't experience that. But I did experience it in Iraq. I did experience it in Baghdad. And then when I was there in 2004, I mean, you would see, I can remember being at lunch, sitting around a table at lunch with a whole lot of people, and people were telling jokes and talking and this, that, and the other. And suddenly there was the sound of an explosion. And I had recently come from London, so I looked up, and everybody, it was like just a sort of pause, and then they carried on talking. And you could almost feel the sort of explosion go through their head in some way, go through their consciousness. And so everybody else carried on as if nothing had happened, and I thought, I have to go see what happened. So I went to the roof. The roofs are flat in Iraq, and looked out to see where the bomb had been. And it wasn't in our street, and it was about 2 or 3 streets away. You could see from the smoke where it was coming. And they'd made that calculation. They were able to make that calculation, which I hadn't been because I was new to it. And I sort of began to think, well, what is it like when you're living in this kind of situation, day by day by day by day? What is that? And what is the resistance to it? And how do you get through it? What do you tell your children? And how do you deal with the inevitable losses, tragic and violent and barbaric losses that people suffered? So that was what, that's why 2006. And you're absolutely right. I mean, in terms of the media, as soon as the actual shooting stops, the media coverage stops, and it's like, the war is over. Actually, the war is not over. It's still not over.
Even though this story and the events are often very traumatic and sad or shocking, there's also a certain lightness to the movie. It doesn't feel like all depressive, because you also have little moments of happiness, of romance or joking, yeah. Would you say that's something like part of the mentality of the people that you saw when you were there? Like you just told us about this, how people were telling jokes, even though they were in the situation of constant threat.
Yes, and I think it also is a kind of resistance, that sort of jokes and singing a song, at a time really is not where you think, what are you singing about? It is. I mean, and in that time, actually, Iraq became something like a joke factory. I mean, every day new jokes were coming out, and it's sort of, and that scene in the bus where they kind of, somebody gets shot on the street outside the bus, and suddenly it all becomes a joke. People didn't get killed that day, but they have plenty of opportunities later on in the day if they want them, to get killed. And that's a real scene. That actual dialogue, more or less, happened in Irada, my co-writer, was there on the bus when this sort of happened. And I was there also on a different bus journey when that kind of thing happened. And I saw that again and again. It was an act of self-defense, really, people defending themselves against. Because you have a choice, you either drown with it or you somehow find a way of kind of avoiding it or floating on top of it. And I think
the reason is all the wars and all the circumstances, all the history, the people. I mean, if you are thinking about the generation which is now, people who are maybe 30, 40 years old, they were just born in war. I'm now elder. I'm so glad that I, although just a bit remember, but that I lived a certain period without war in the 17th when I was born. So if you just imagine the people who are living there, they didn't ever live in a time without war or without.
Yes. It was the wars. The Iran-Iraq war, which went on for 8 years, for no particular reason, just 2 million people or something got killed. And people, as they were growing up, and their older brothers would come back dead and so forth. People grew up. They grew up, and then there was the sanctions, the embargo after '91. Which was UN imposed, and mainly led by the US, and it tore the fabric of the society to bits in Iraq, and 500,000 children died of starvation, which hadn't happened before, because certain things were denied them. You couldn't even send a pencil to Iraq because it might be used for military purposes, that sort of thing. It was a disastrous time. So it was thing after thing after thing like that, and people have somehow found a kind of resilience that everything crashes down and then they rebuild, and it crashes down and they rebuild. And this is, in Iraqi history, that's been the case again and again and again.
And this is more, I think, the reason then that you I don't know, or is it like this that sometimes I hear people talking about what character has the Iraqi people comparing to other Arabic, and I think you are not speaking about Iraqi people who are specifically very full of humor, or واحد يقول إحنا شعب ثقيل أكثر شيء يعني we say the Iraqi. I heard of other Arabs saying Iraqi people are more known as bit heavy or deep people, deep persons. So the humor, I think, is coming from these experiences you are talking about. Yeah. Or what do you think? You maybe know better than me.
I think so. It's a long history of
how would they describe the Iraqi people? Comparing to Egyptian, for example.
Yes. Well, the Egyptians are. Well, I'll tell you exactly. There's something that happened when I was in teaching in Palestine, and there are a lot of the musicians, really good musicians in Iraq, were Jewish, but they left and they came back. They came to Israel, and I wanted to make a film about them, and I went to talk to them, to talk to people. There was a guy who played a flute that he had just made, and he said, "I'm going to play you some music now." So he played me some music, and it was a wonderful lyrical tune. And he said, "What did you think of that?" I said, "Oh, it's very beautiful. It really sort of lifts you." And then he played another one. And I thought to myself, but this is the same tune, but he played it in a different way. I said, "It's the same tune, isn't it?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, it feels completely different. It feels like, a sense of grief, real grief." And he said, "Yes, well, there are accents in music, like there are in speaking, and he said the first one was the Egyptian accent, the very happy one. The other one, of course,
interesting.
Was the Iraqi one. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I mean. It's also what I always hear about.
But actually, Iraqis do make a lot of jokes. Actually, they really do. And
yeah,
they do, and it's sort of, and especially in this period, They were coming
Of
from
yes.
Yeah.
To deal with all this
Yeah.
traumata.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you have plans for future movies? Will you go back to documentary, or are you working on another feature film project?
Well, I'm in very early days trying to write a script. But it's, getting this film out there and distributed and shown and so forth is, taking a lot of time and work. So, yeah. So I have a project which I've been doing a lot of research into, and just in the very early days of writing the script. So I just need to get some extended time to do that, yeah. But it'll be in Iraq again.
And we're certainly very excited for that, and we'll keep an eye on it, but you can take your time now, because now it's just the time that Our River, Our Sky is starting in the movies. You can read the review, of course, on Moviebreak and all other movie news you know. I'm Lida, and I say thank you to Maysoon and Meriam for the interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.